You never get used to the silence around Chernobyl. 38 years after the meltdown, the forest is thick with memory. Ash trees, wild birch, black pines swallowing old roads and empty villages. The only sounds most nights are the crackle of Geiger counters and the shuffle of boots through leaf litter. But the wolves are everywhere. Bigger, bolder, unlike any you'd find outside the zone. I'm Dr. Masha Leonova, field biologist, radiation ecology. We came to study how life returns after disaster. How birds nest in rusted playgrounds, how boar root through abandoned towns, how plants break through concrete floors. But in the exclusion zone, nature doesn't just reclaim, it mutates. Chernobyl's wolves were always special, immune to fear, thriving on radioactive prey, their eyes gold and wild. But this year, something changed. We started hearing the howls. First, it was just noise, long, low, shivering cries under a bleeding moon. But then the patterns crept in. Pauses, echoes, and then syllables. Rhythms that weren't wolf, weren't wind, weren't any animal song we'd cataloged. The villagers whispered about it. "They talk now," said an old man in Pripyat, voice shaking. "Wolves that speak Russian. Voices in the forest that say our names." We laughed at first, blamed it on isolation, too many years haunted by ghosts. But then we recorded it ourselves. One night our trail cam caught the pack circling the old reactor fence. Their eyes glowed green in the infrared, pelts shaggy with winter, paws crunching frost. Then came the sound, a howl, deep and rising, splitting into notes that hovered, twisted, then bent. At first it sounded like a mistake, an echo, but the sound formed something familiar, a word, mama. The wolf's head turned toward the microphone. It howled again, "Pomogi, help." We played the audio back a dozen times. No distortion, no radio static, just a wolf's throat shaping impossible syllables. The team went quiet. Everyone pretended to focus on data, but I saw their hands trembling. Somehow, the wolves were imitating human speech. The next night, we set up more recorders, deep in the pines, near old concrete bunkers, under the skeleton of a collapsed school. The voices came again. Not clear, not smooth, raw, broken, dragged out of nightmares. "Yazidis, I'm here." The notes carried through the woods, echoing off steel and stone. I stayed up, headphones on, listening to hours of tape. My brain told me it was a trick, whined through broken windows, dogs barking in the distance. But the words repeated. Always at the edge of the wolf howls, like a secret barely learned. The wolves were copying us, learning from old emergency broadcasts, the scattered radios still working on shortwave, the voices of researchers and workers that haunted the zone for decades. But imitation wasn't the only thing that changed. The wolves themselves looked different. Heavier jaws, odd scars. Some had extra toes, split tails, mottled fur that shimmered under UV. We started tracking a female the locals called Kyornaya. Black one, she moved with purpose, leading the pack right to the border of the dead city and then stopping, always looking back at us, as if waiting for permission. One night she sat outside our camp fence and just stared. No fear, no hunger, just focus. She tilted her head and let out a low, rumbling howl. It was almost a question. Then, in the same warped, throaty voice, "KTO Tai? Who are you?" My blood ran cold. I stepped outside, breath fogging in the cold, and stared into the darkness. Her eyes caught the moon. She didn't move, didn't threaten, just waited. I whispered, "Masha." She howled once, then melted back into the trees. That night, nobody slept. I wrote down everything, every word, every sound, every heartbeat. I was trained to explain things, to find the scientific root. But nothing in my education prepared me for this. Wolves that didn't just echo language. Wolves that asked who we were. Wolves that wanted to know if we were listening. After that night, everything changed. The camp was restless, every flashlight beam shaking, every whispered conversation stopping when the howls started. People kept glancing at the tree line, wondering if the wolves were watching, or listening, or waiting for a word they'd recognize. We doubled the fence, set more cameras, changed our routines. But it didn't matter. The wolves weren't afraid of us. They weren't curious either. They seemed expectant, like we were the ones being studied now. Each night the howls grew more complicated, not just words, fragments of sentences. Crude, but unmistakable. Golos, voice. IDTI domoi, go home. I started logging every phrase, comparing the cadence to speech patterns, emergency broadcasts, Slavic lullabies, Soviet-era PSAs. Some words were perfect imitations, others warped, stretched, a wolf's tongue trying to copy a human's mouth. The pack's behavior changed, too. They left symbols, bones arranged in spirals, paw prints pressed into the mud to look like Cyrillic letters. Once we found a circle of animal skulls with an old weathered radio in the center. The batteries were dead, but when we shook it, it sputtered static. A broken voice buried in white noise murmured, "KTO slushayet? Who's listening?" My teammates were split. Some wanted to call in the authorities. Others argued we should leave the zone, burn every note, pretend we never heard anything. One scientist, Victor, joked nervously that we should howl back, teach the wolves our names, see if they'd use them. That night, as the wind whipped through the dead trees, I tried it. I stepped outside the fence, heart pounding, and howled my own name. Masha. The forest went silent. Then, deep in the darkness, an answer, not a howl. A word, Masha. Clear as broken glass. Every hair on my body stood up. Back at camp, I pretended I wasn't shaking, but the truth was I'd never felt so exposed. We started sleeping in shifts. Trail cameras showed the wolves drawing closer every night. They didn't threaten, didn't attack. They just circled, observed, a pack of witnesses. But the language kept growing. The next recording was longer. A voice, almost human, almost wolf, howled Ogon, fire, struck, fear. Then, almost pleading, no ukodi, don't go. One night I woke to find Chernobyl pacing outside the tent. She didn't run when I unzipped the flap. She sat, tail curled, and stared at me with eyes that didn't blink. I whispered, "What do you want?" She cocked her head. Then, in that warped, wild voice, "Dom." Home. It hit me all at once. The wolves weren't just copying us. They were calling to us, testing the words, searching for something familiar. I wondered if they remembered before the zone, before the silence, before the world left them behind, or if this was something new, an intelligence we'd never seen, rising out of the ashes of disaster. We started tracking the wolves deeper into the exclusion zone. Ruined villages, cracked playgrounds, fields of sunflowers gone feral. Everywhere we went, we found signs. More bones, more symbols, more circles. Sometimes the wolves watched from a distance, eyes glowing in the half-light. Sometimes we heard them mutter words as they ran, like children repeating a new language in a dream. Victor thought it was evolution, sped up by radiation, forced by survival. But I wasn't sure. One night, a storm rolled in. Rain hammered the tents, thunder rolling through the empty city. Somewhere near the reactor, a wolf howled. Not just a word, but a sentence. Broken, struggling, but real. GDEVSE? Where is everyone? That was when I realized the wolves weren't just learning to speak, they were learning to ask. And in their questions, I heard the one I was too afraid to say out loud. If the wolves could speak, what did they want to tell us? And what would happen when they learned to listen for an answer? There are some lines you cross without knowing. By the time you realize it, you're already too far to turn back. We'd stopped being scientists and become something closer to students. Sitting quietly each night, waiting for the wolves to speak, our data logs grew thick with recordings. Long strings of broken Russian, stray English syllables, old Soviet radio call signs, even laughter that didn't sound quite human or animal. The rest of the world ignored us. Headlines about the zone had faded, replaced by newer disasters. No one cared about strange wolves howling words in a place they'd written off as lost. But for us, the world was shrinking. Every night, the wolves came closer. On the cameras, we saw them circling just outside the fence, jaws closed, eyes bright and focused. Sometimes they sat for hours, unmoving, as if listening for something only they could hear. Sometimes, at dawn, I'd find muddy paw prints near the supply tent, trails that formed spirals or crooked letters. Chernobyl became bolder. She began to mimic my morning routines, following me from a safe distance as I checked sensors, sometimes sitting in the same spot I'd just stood. She didn't growl, she didn't threaten. She only watched, but the other wolves were changing too. One evening, Victor ran toward the fire pit, waving his notebook. They answered, he panted. They didn't just repeat me, they replied. He played the recording, his hands shaking. Victor's voice. KTO Tam, who's there? A wolf's voice, lower, with a strange new certainty, my ZDs. We are here, we, not I. We played it again and again. The camp went silent. The air felt heavier, electric. Suddenly it wasn't just mimicry, it was conversation. I tried to sleep that night, but the howls wouldn't let me. They rose and fell, singing new words, sentences, fragments, commands. Once, half asleep, I thought I heard my mother's name. I bolted upright. Outside the tent, the darkness moved. Shapes padded between the trees, pausing just at the edge of the light. I stepped out, flashlight shaking. Chernobyl? The word echoed, then faded. Then a voice answered, almost gentle. Da. Yes. For a moment, I felt hope. If they could speak, maybe they could help us understand what the zone had become. But the next morning, things changed. Victor was gone. His boots were by the fire pit, laces undone, but his notebook was missing. Trail cameras caught him walking into the woods before dawn, barefoot, head bowed. No fear in his movements, just purpose. Chernobyl followed. We searched all day. No tracks, no blood, no sign of struggle. Just a single word scratched into the mud with a stick, Doma. Home. That afternoon, we found Victor's notebook on the fence post. Inside, his last entry, I think I understand. The wolves don't want to become us, they want us to join them. The realization chilled me to the bone. I watched my team grow quiet, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. We all heard voices now, even in daylight. Sometimes our own, sometimes each other's, sometimes words we hadn't spoken, yet. The wolves watched, silent and patient, learning, testing, teaching. By the end of the week, I couldn't tell if the camp was a research station or something else. A school, a shrine, a trap. One night, the wolves howled a song none of us recognized. It was beautiful and strange, half language, half lament. We recorded it, played it back at half speed. Under the howls, a phrase emerged, Vicio Odno, all is one. That night, I dreamed I was running with the pack, fur on my skin, paws on soft ground, words on my tongue I'd never learned. When I woke, my hands trembled. On my palm, drawn in ash from the fire, was a crude spiral, the same pattern the wolves left in the dirt. And in my chest, a voice, not mine but inside me, whispered a question I knew I'd answer soon. Are you ready? The night before we left the zone, the sky burned green with auroras. Radiation storms flickered across the treetops, lighting the ruins in an unholy glow. We should have been packing, but nobody moved. We sat in silence, listening to the wolves. Their howls rose and fell, sometimes shaped into words, sometimes just music. But there was a difference now, a rhythm, a pattern. It was as if the wolves weren't just singing to each other, but to us, inviting, demanding, begging us to join. Chernobyl appeared at the camp edge, her fur limned in emerald light. She wasn't alone. The whole pack watched, lined up like witnesses, eyes burning. Someone, maybe me, called out, "What do you want?" A pause. Then in that raw, beautiful, not quite human voice, Vispomene. Remember, it was a command and a plea. I felt something break inside me. Every memory of the zone, every night listening to the wolves, every quiet horror, rushed back, sharp and overwhelming. The forest wasn't empty. It was full of memory, of loss, of longing. Of all the people who'd once lived here, now only whispers in the dark. Chernobyl took a step forward, her gaze never leaving mine. Behind me, someone sobbed. Someone else began to hum, a lullaby their grandmother used to sing. The wolves howled in response, matching the tune, shaping it into new words. Vernus Domoy, come home. One by one, my team moved to the fence. No one spoke, no one stopped, we just listened. The wolves circled closer, not hunting, not hostile, just waiting. I understood then what Victor meant. The wolves didn't want to be us. They wanted us to remember what it meant to belong. To a pack, to a place, to something greater than fear. Chernobyl had forced them to change, to learn the language of survivors. And they wanted us to learn theirs. Chernobyl howled again, this time my name, Masha. I felt the urge to answer, not with words, but with something deeper. I closed my eyes and let the memory of every howl, every broken syllable, echo in my chest. When I opened my eyes, Chernobyl was gone. So was the pack. Only paw prints remained, spiraling in the ash, fading in the wind. The sun rose pale and cold over the dead city. We packed and left in silence. But as the van rumbled down the cracked road, I watched the trees and wondered, how much of me would stay behind? How much of them would come with me? Back home, the city noise felt thin and brittle. I still wake at night, listening for howls. Sometimes, in the half-light, I hear a voice, not quite mine, not quite theirs, whispering, "Vicio Odno." All is one, and I wonder if the wolves ever stopped learning, or if they're still out there, waiting for the world to listen,